Legal advisor humiliated by billionaire family at conference, but they didn't know she drafted the contract that destroyed them. I thought slavery was abolished in 1865, she whispered. Apparently, the memo never reached the Winsley family. The murmurs in the room silenced like a switch had been flipped. 1,000 eyes turned toward the lone black woman standing at the edge of the mahogany stage, hands clasped behind her back, spine as straight as the moral code she'd spent a lifetime building. Her name was Amara Hale, and in exactly 7 minutes, she would unravel the legacy of one of the most powerful families in American history. 3 hours earlier, Amara had been standing in front of her hotel mirror in D.C., adjusting the collar of her crisp charcoal suit. She'd known the day would be ugly. The Winsleys never held back when they wanted to assert power. It wasn't that they didn't know she was a legal advisor. They just assumed that meant secretary, assistant, the help. And Amara had learned long ago. Let them assume. The Winsley Global Expansion Conference was a spectacle of excess gold-trimmed everything. Imported orchids, champagne towers, the kind of gathering where old money flexed in new ways. But under the chandeliers and smiles was a battlefield, and Amara carried the sharpest weapon, the contract. She had spent 6 months drafting it in silence, behind closed doors and NDAs. It was a multi-billion-dollar deal with international investors, tied together with legal knots only she could untangle or pull apart. And though she worked under Whitmore and James LLP, it was her mind, her language, her signature that made the deal airtight. Or deadly, depending on who asked. The problem was the Winsleys never asked. She had barely taken her seat at the conference when she felt the weight of dismissal. It started with a sneer from Carter Winsley, the heir apparent. When she reached for a coffee, "Did you make this?" Then the whisper from Lillian Winsley, matriarch of the empire, "I didn't know they allowed interns to attend board-level briefings." The final insult came on stage. "We're proud to announce," Carter grinned at the audience, "that our newest deal was secured thanks to the hard work of our brilliant team, led by our general counsel Matthew Grant." A white man in his 50s stepped forward awkwardly. He glanced at Amara, then quickly looked away. The applause was thunderous. Amara's name wasn't mentioned once. She smiled. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Matthew had begged her to lead the drafting after he failed to understand the foreign tax implications. What they didn't know was that Carter had skimmed the executive summary and skipped the attachments. What they didn't know was that the exit clause hidden on page 147 had been Amara's idea. What they didn't know would destroy them. The moderator called for closing remarks. Investors waited, pens poised. The stage lights flickered as Amara stepped forward. "I'd like to make a correction," she said, her voice low but clear. The deal wasn't led by Matthew Grant. He couldn't even pronounce half the countries involved. The contract, every clause, every risk factor was written by me, Amara Hale, lead counsel on behalf of Whitmore and James. Carter chuckled nervously. "I think we've had enough entertainment. Sit down," Amara said, her eyes locking with his. "You're about to learn what a footnote can do." The projector behind her came to life. The first page of the contract appeared, her name at the bottom, in bold. Then she navigated to Clause 72C, breach of ethics. What happens when a primary stakeholder is found guilty of racial discrimination by 3 or more independent witnesses? Amara asked. No one answered. She clicked again. Termination of contract without financial compensation. Immediate retraction of assets. And breach penalties owed to all international parties. Gasps echoed through the hall. Lillian Winsley stood up, red-faced. "You're bluffing." "I'm not," Amara replied. "You signed it." Page 147, paragraph 2. "Your son, Carter, called me a racial slur during a recorded phone call last week. 2 other employees overheard it. I filed the report this morning." The silence was absolute. Then a scream. Carter lunged toward her, only to be intercepted by security. Outside, the press were already gathering. Inside, the Winsleys sat frozen, watching their empire collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. Amara turned toward the stunned room, voice steady. "Maybe next time, ask who wrote your contract." The room dissolved into chaos. Lawyers rushed forward like ants from a disturbed nest. Phones were whipped out, voices rose, and the curtain of control that the Winsley family had so carefully drawn over their public image began to rip apart, thread by thread. Amara didn't flinch. She stood still on the stage, the spotlight no longer a weapon aimed at her, but a shield. Her calm was terrifying. Not angry, not smug, just resolved like someone who had carried this moment in her chest like a secret for months, feeding it like a flame, waiting for the wind. Carter, red-faced and panting, was escorted to the back of the ballroom by 2 security guards. His mother, Lillian, was shouting into her phone, her other hand trembling as she snatched the printed contract from a folder and scanned the pages, as if sheer willpower could undo ink. Across the room, Matthew Grant, the man who had taken credit for her work, sat with his head in his hands. The moderator, white as a sheet, stepped back onto the stage. We will now take a brief recess." Amara turned and walked off the stage slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome ticking toward justice. The crowd parted for her like water for a blade. Outside in the hallway, she exhaled for the first time all morning. Ms. Hale, a young journalist with an oversized press badge, approached cautiously. "Is it true you were the primary architect of the deal?" Amara smiled faintly. "It's all in the footnotes." Another journalist, then another. Soon a swarm had gathered. Flashes, microphones, voices demanding truth, context, comment. She didn't need to say much. The contract and the footage of Carter's meltdown would do most of the talking. But behind the noise, Amara felt something shift. Not satisfaction, not vengeance. Something quieter, quicker, like release. A hand touched her arm. It was Diane Moore, her direct supervisor from Whitmore and James. A white woman in her late 50s, sharp and usually unreadable, but right now, visibly shaken. "I didn't know they were going to—" Diane stopped, tried again. "You should have told me." "And risk this being handled quietly?" Amara replied. "Swept under the rug like every other time?" Diane sighed, nodded once, then said what no one else had the courage to. "You were brilliant." Amara turned her gaze toward the ballroom, where the murmur of unraveling power continued to rise. "No," she said softly. "I was patient." Hours later, the official statement from Whitmore and James hit every financial news outlet. "Due to a breach of ethical provisions and clear violations of our inclusivity policy, all negotiations with Winsley Global Holdings have been terminated effective immediately. We thank Ms. Amara Hale for her exceptional diligence and courage in safeguarding the integrity of this firm." The market responded swiftly. Winsley Global Holdings stock plummeted by 18% in the first 2 hours. By the next morning, international partners were demanding immediate audits. Whispers of past abuses resurfaced. Former employees came forward. Hashtags trended. And Amara, she went home. To a modest walk-up in southeast D.C., where the ceilings cracked slightly and the heat pipes banged in winter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and hers. She poured herself a glass of wine, kicked off her shoes, and let her body relax into the battered couch that had carried her through law school. Her phone buzzed non-stop congratulations, outrage, interviews. She turned it off. Tonight wasn't about them. Tonight was about her mother. Decades earlier, Amara had sat on the floor of a Birmingham apartment while her mother scrubbed hotel bathrooms by day and studied for her GD by night. A black woman with fire in her veins and a permanent ache in her back, who told Amara 2 things every single morning. "You're going to have to be twice as good just to be seen as enough. Never let them make you smaller than the truth." Amara had lived both, felt both, worn them like armor through Ivy League classrooms and boardroom negotiations. And today, finally, it had been enough. A knock at her door pulled her from the past. It was Ezra, the last person she expected. Ezra Manning had been her closest friend at the firm before he left for a job at another agency. They had met during orientation, 2 rising stars, one black, one biracial, both tired of pretending they didn't see the patterns. She hadn't seen him in over a year. "You're glowing," he said, stepping inside. I'm exhausted. Same thing, right now? He sat beside her, handing her a manila envelope. What's this? Opportunity, Ezra said. I've been building something. Quietly. A legal consultancy, minority-led, equity-based. Real representation. And I want you in. As a partner. Amara blinked. He grinned. Yeah, I know. No pressure. But this. He gestured toward the folder. Then the turned-off TV still playing a frozen screenshot of her face on the news. This was seismic. You're not just good. You're needed. Amara opened the envelope. Inside was a vision statement. Proposal. A challenge. She looked at Ezra. And for the first time in years, she felt something other than defense. She felt potential. You think the world's ready? She asked. Ezra laughed. No. But that's never stopped you before. 2 weeks later, the headlines had changed. The Winsleys were under federal review for discrimination practices. Major investors had pulled out. Their name was still powerful, but now it came with asterisks and whispers. And Amara? She was preparing for her first client as co-founder of Hale and Manning LLP. Her office was small, her staff lean, but the cases were real. Immigrant workers underpaid. Black executives bypassed. Native land rights ignored. She took them all. And she remembered every insult. Every room she was talked over in. Every time someone asked if she was with catering. She remembered them. And she built something stronger. Not for revenge. But because some battles aren't about who's loudest in the room, they're about who understands the fine print. Who dares to believe that justice isn't theoretical. And who's brave enough to put their name on the contract anyway. 3 months later, Amara stood in the marble lobby of the federal building in Manhattan, holding a folder thick with depositions and sealed affidavits. Her heels clicked with precision. She had a hearing in 10 minutes and she wasn't nervous. Not anymore. The Winsleys had returned. Not to power, but to desperation. Despite the hemorrhaging stock and tanked public image, they had decided to fight. To sue Whitmore and James for breach of contract. Claiming Amara had acted maliciously. That the clause was illegal. That the firm was liable. It was absurd. But it was also dangerous. They were rich. Still connected. Still calculating. And they wanted to drag her through the mud. Smear her name. Destroy her credibility. Amara knew the playbook. She had lived it. The courtroom was high-ceilinged. Solemn. Journalists filled the back row. Among them were interns and junior attorneys she recognized from past cases, most of them black or brown, watching her like she was carrying more than her own reputation. Because she was. She took her seat beside Ezra. You ready? He asked under his breath. Born ready. Across the aisle sat the Winsleys' legal team, led by Martin DeLong, a slick, gray-haired attorney who had never lost a case for a Fortune 500 in 20 years. He smirked at her like he knew a secret. Let him, Amara thought. Let him smirk. The judge, a stern black woman named Delaney, entered. All rise. The hearing began. DeLong started with a theatrical performance. Ms. Hale exploited a privileged position to sabotage a legacy deal. This was not advocacy, it was vendetta. He called Matthew Grant as a witness. Matthew, shaken and pale, testified with careful wording, admitting he'd relied on Amara's expertise, but also hinting that she'd gone rogue. Ezra leaned in. That coward. It's fine, Amara whispered. Let them finish the song. Then it was her turn. She rose, confident, controlled. Your Honor, she said. Opposing counsel would have you believe I manipulated an entire legal framework for revenge. But here's the truth, I followed the law. I followed the ethics. They didn't. She submitted the phone call transcript, 3 notarized witness statements, and an email from Carter Winsley using racial slurs while discussing company hires. She showed Clause 72C, highlighting how it mirrored language from prior Winsley contracts, meaning they had used it before when convenient. And yet, she said, looking directly at the judge, when I enforced their own language, suddenly I'm the problem. She paused. Let the silence linger. Black professionals don't get the luxury of silence. We don't get to coast. We get to smile through insult, build in the background, and pray our brilliance is noticed without being threatening. That's the game. And I played it, until I realized I didn't want to win their game. I wanted to rewrite the rules. Judge Delaney didn't blink, but the corner of her mouth tightened just a little. When DeLong tried to object, Amara didn't flinch. I have nothing to hide, she continued. And if standing up to a dynasty makes me dangerous, then maybe danger was overdue. By the end of the session, the room was breathless. Judge Delaney took only 20 minutes to return her ruling. Motion to sue Ms. Hale for malicious breach is hereby denied. The court recognizes Ms. Hale's actions as within her professional duty and in accordance with ethical conduct. The Winsley claim is dismissed with prejudice. A beat. Ms. Hale, this court commends your courage. Applause broke out not from the legal team, but from the gallery. The interns, the law students, the young attorneys of color who saw her not just as a name, but as proof. Proof that the system could bend without breaking. That it could sometimes be used to fight back. Outside, Ezra was beaming. You know what this means? I get to sleep for 12 hours? He laughed. That too. But also we're going to have a line of clients out the door. Every woman who's ever been silenced. Every person passed over. You didn't just win a case. You started a movement. But Amara didn't answer right away. She was watching the sky, the clouds breaking, a light breeze stirring the flag above the courthouse. Not a metaphor, just a moment. I don't want a movement, she said finally. I want longevity. I want this to last. I want girls like us to grow up thinking this kind of victory isn't rare, it's expected. Ezra nodded slowly. Then let's build it. A year passed. Hale and Manning LLP grew faster than either of them expected. Within 12 months, they had offices in D.C. and Atlanta. 10 attorneys. All of them people who had been overlooked, underestimated, passed over. All of them brilliant. Amara became a speaker reluctantly at first, then fiercely. Law schools asked her to guest lecture. Organizations nominated her for awards. She turned most down, because her joy wasn't in the spotlight. It was in the conference rooms, the strategy sessions, the look in a client's eyes when someone finally listened. One day, a 17-year-old intern approached her after work. Can I ask something? Of course. Were you scared? The girl asked. That day at the conference, when they tried to humiliate you. Amara thought for a long time. Yes, she said, but not of them. I was scared I'd let it happen again, that I'd let myself shrink, that I'd stay silent when I had a voice full of thunder. The intern blinked. And you didn't. No, Amara said softly. I didn't. She visited her mother's grave that spring, left a small gold pen on the stone, the same one she'd used to sign the Winsley contract, the one that rewrote her life. I did it, Mama, she whispered. I didn't let them make me smaller than the truth. The wind stirred. Car passed. Nothing grand happened. Just peace. The kind that doesn't come from revenge or victory or applause, but from knowing you were right, and that the world, however slowly, was finally catching up. The end.